Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Paul Naquin, and glad to see a lot of people made it back into this session. It's not lost on us that 2 long but hopefully productive days. The reality is you have to listen to us talk about data for the next 15 minutes. And while it's probably not the most riveting topic on the agenda, we saw some pretty cool stuff yesterday. We do think it's worthy of a conversation. So we're going to talk fast. We only have 15 minutes. We hope you listen fast, pick up a couple of things as we go through this. So I'm going to start with a bit of humor. A data scientist walks into a bar and orders 1.37 drinks. Come on. That reaction, like a couple of you sort of got it, and some of you, as best I can tell, look a little bit confused, wondering what the heck's going on. And that really probably sums up where we are from a data perspective in the insurance industry, right? People still trying to figure it out. A bit of a spectrum of perspectives overall, and we did 5. I don't know how many people fill out I think they closed the survey, but we did 5 questions before we came in, and this first one was really asking you guys, where do you think we are as it relates to data? I assume they can see the screens. Can we see the polls on the screens or no? So in this very first one, that pretty decent amount says we're keeping pace. So it's a little bit less than half, so falling behind, don't have a plan, a little bit actually ahead of the industry. So it's what we thought, like we would see a spectrum of answers. And I think one thing that we can all agree on is that there's a ton of data in general in this industry. I've worked across a lot of industries, and insurance probably has as much or more than anybody, and it's growing all the time. But here's a question, though. Are we actually smarter because of all of our data? You can answer if you want to, but I'll share a quick client story. So earlier this year into last year, we talked to, 12, 15 of our clients about their data situation. And we were talking to this one large carrier client. He was their CTO, and he said something I thought was really interesting. He said, we don't have a data problem. We have tons of data. We're actually data rich, but we're information poor. And that's sort of the title of our session. And as we talked to other clients, and we sort of pushed on them, they all sort of reached that same conclusion. They didn't use the exact same words he did, but they all sort of reached that same conclusion. And I think you'll see that across the industry. And if we ask for a show of hands, a lot of you would probably say the same thing. John, you've been around a lot of data, AI build type things. What's your thoughts on the client's quote?
So I think the quote really resonates with me. I think most leaders don't realize that they have a problem right now. This one specifically. They think it's a dashboard issue, a reporting issue, maybe a headcount problem, right? When the real issue is the gap between what the data tells you and what your people can actually act on. And that gap, it's not a complaint, it's really a diagnosis. So, frankly, the answer's not outside, it's inside the organization. So, there's 3 places where it shows up, and we're going to talk about that across, this conversation, but it's the data you own, the knowledge that walks out the door, and technology, which either is a bridge or a bottleneck. And I think that applies to, whether you're a carrier, MGA, broker, retailer, it applies to everybody. Yeah.
So let's talk about the first thing that you talked about, and that's the data that you already own. And if you go to the next poll question, you guys can see the results here, where it talks about over the last decade, how much of it's actually working for you. And the consensus is some of it, and it's a mix of the other ones. And so, like we talked about, every organization's got a ton of data, accumulates a ton of data, whether it's policy data, claims data, submissions, audits. It's all over the place. And but per the poll, it's not all working for you. And I'm curious, John, your thoughts on why isn't it working more so?
Well, I think the data's there. It's the plumbing that's not in many cases. Most organizations are usually using maybe 20% of their data. in a way that's beneficial. And now with AI, things are obviously changing. We all recognize that. The models themselves have become a utility. And that's like electricity, and no one wins just by having electricity. It's what do you do with it? And I think the reality is you can, stand up a model, the same model I can. You can build the architecture, the same architecture I can from a competition perspective. So model is not the differentiator anymore. It's really your moat, which is your data, your processes, your IP, and your people. So it comes down to things like how do you price risk that no one will touch? How do you settle a claim that should have gone to litigation? How do you save a renewal at the 11th hour? These are things a competitor can't license, and that's what's unique to you. So, the data lives across systems, and you can't query it potentially, and you can't access it. And that's where it starts to really become a bottleneck. And, it's not a data problem, it's a connection problem.
Yeah. And I think that's true across a lot of different technologies. Every 5 or 10 years, there's a new technology that pops out. AI is the latest one. But if you think about CRMs or ERPs or SaaS or cloud, everybody wanted to use that technology to separate, the winners from the losers. And it's not the technology itself that tends to separate. It's the foundational work underneath it. And if you're not willing to do the foundational work, which is a lot of times the unglamorous part of that, right? Cleaning up your data, doing the data migration. If you were in the last session, you heard Crystal and Kevin talking about that. Training your people. If you don't get all that right, it doesn't matter what technology you buy. And a lot of times companies get it backwards where they buy technology to fix the problem. If you don't fix the foundational stuff, it doesn't matter what technology you put on top of it. You got it backwards, and it's not gonna fix the underlying issues that you're trying to solve. So the second part you talked about was data at risk of walking out the door. So if we go to the next question, it was about succession planning, and we talked about most companies have a succession plan for their CEO. Do you have one for the next 50 and the people that actually do the work in the organization? And you can see sort of resounding no, we know it's a problem. And the second piece was yes, a little bit here, informally documented. So this is really a problem across organizations. And this is data we're talking about that's not on a dashboard. You're not going to find it in an audit. It's stuff in people's head, right? I mean, it's 20 to 30 years of knowledge around pattern recognition, judgment calls, risk calculations, relationships that they built that, again, doesn't live in a system. It's in them, and unfortunately, it's not going to be there forever.
Yeah, and the succession plan is obviously it's an issue now. But you have to look back and say, do we have a succession plan for our top 5 underwriters, for our senior claims team, for the producer that owns half your renewal book, right? These are really, really big problems, and you have to be able to understand that the producer's the only one who knows why the account hasn't renewed for the last 3 years. That's information that you have to get out and extract and put it into the systems. Those people have a retirement date, and if your plan doesn't exist, it's a problem.
Yeah. No, and I think most people, I've talked to a lot of people about that, this issue in the room, and I think people know that the retirement dilemma is real, the fuse is lit, and it needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. So the third piece you talked about was technology as a bridge or bottleneck. So if we go to the next polling question, Mark Breeding and William had a similar question yesterday when they were on stage. It talks about where are you with your AI investments that you've made recently. And again, you can see a mix, but the winner is we're behind where we hoped, right? A little bit on track, too early to tell, even some that haven't made one yet. And so I want to talk, John, a little bit about why companies are behind this curve. And we talked about the data you have that's not being used. You talked about the data that's going to walk out the door. Where does technology fit in this? Like, technology tends to get a lot of the attention. It gets a lot of the budget. It also gets a lot of the blame. How does it fit into this? Yeah,
I mean, I think, the systems you bought for the last 20 years, everything's been bantered as the cure, right? Each system, whether it was, policy administration, CRM, claims, data lakes, BI, and now it's AI. And each system added new data and new challenges, and the problem just starts to compound. You know, maybe it answered more questions, maybe it added more problems. You know, but ultimately, a clean foundation across your data architecture gives you leverage, and a broken foundation just creates chaos at scale.
Yeah, I agree. If you don't get the 4 layers right, AI will only compound. It can compound the operations if you do get it right. If you don't get it right, if you miss one or all of them, it's going to compound the problem for sure.
Yeah, and so, you know, really AI is the last chapter, and it's the same playbook. And I think we kind of have to say the quiet thing out loud, which is most of the AI investments don't deliver, right? And it's not because AI is bad. It's not. But, you know, it's never been more true, the garbage in, garbage out conversation now. But it's a reality. But there's really kind of 3 patterns that we see. And those patterns, the first one is like, you know, the pilot that never scales, right? It's so easy to throw together a demo these days in a way that just was never possible in the past. And it looks beautiful in Sandbox. It's fantastic, right? The demo data is clean, but production's different, right? It's a little bit of a war zone at times, and the system goes live, and it dies in production when the underwriting team uses it on Friday, right? So it's not the same that it was.
Yeah. No, we see that. I mean, we've heard clients talk about it. We've seen it ourselves where the demo allows you to get the budget, but 12 months later, it never makes it in production. And it's sort of the difference between, like, look what it can do and how do you make it work every day in real life.
Exactly. And the next one is the platform play, right? So we've got vendors talking to us about really new, neat platforms. We've got to jump in and do it. Well, okay, great, but if the purchase is made based on no use case, then you're going backwards, right? The demo can't be the use case for the platform. There has to be an underlying business need to drive investment in these systems. And so that's where it becomes a problem by rushing into things without actually defining the use cases, working with the business, and deciding what we need to actually implement.
Yeah, and we've seen this one as well, where the business is trying to figure out a way to implement an AI strategy, so they just go buy an AI platform or they buy an AI widget, instead of asking, like, what business problems are we trying to solve, what decisions are we trying to influence, so they sort of have it backwards on this whole thing.
Yeah, and the third one is probably the least sexy of all. It's governance, right? There's a big governance trap here. The pilot works, everyone loves it. You know, we want to move forward, run fast, get to market as soon as possible. But it has to be a partnership, business and technology. And you can't run so fast that you hit, you know, ready to go live, and legal, security office steps in to say, whoa, stop. You know, these things have to be a partnership up front from day one.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest problem, is like governance is needed. It's not a bad thing with this stuff. People tend to start it too late in the process. Like when they're ready to implement technology, they start talking about governance, where you really need to start governance as soon as you start the entire project.
Right, so it's not a technology failure. These are foundation failures, and you know, the vendors aren't going to tell you which one is going to happen.
Yeah. So let's go to the last question that we'd asked, and this sort of, as we start to wrap things up a little bit, sort of pulls in the 4 layers that we talked about. And this talks about the single biggest thing holding organizations back. And maybe everybody voted on data because it's we're talking about data, but it's fairly distributed across each of these things. And I don't think that's a necessarily a surprise for us, right? So if we go back to what we started talking about, where we said sort of the data-rich, information-poor piece, we realize that the information poverty is not caused by data alone. It could be any one of these 4 layers, data being one of them, and it really is a connection problem, I think, as much as anything. And frankly, we're not really trying to solve the information poverty question. I mean, ultimately, we want to solve the information piece because it leads to better insight, and then insight ultimately leads to better action. And that's really where we want to go. We want data to drive information, to drive insight, to drive action. And so we talked about the question at the beginning, like, are we smarter because of our data? Maybe that's not the real question we should be asking. The question we should really be asking is, are we actually doing anything different because of it? And so with that, John, I would say, I'm curious from your perspective, if someone in this room wants to move in the next week on data, on the 4 layers, on AI, what would you recommend?
Well, I think there's 3 things you can do, and they'll tell you more than any pitch that you'll hear all year, which is, first, go out and map one decision in the business, right? One recurring decision, whether it's submission to quote, reserve, placement, renewal, and map that data flow end to end. You'll see where the data exists, you'll see where it dies, but you'll also see which human is the only one who knows what to do with it, right? And then you'll learn more from that exercise, I think, than in 6 months of AI strategy work, right? And the second one is look in the organization, find 3 reports no one uses anymore. Why not? What's the problem? What do they think? Why, ask the users what the issue is and why they stop trusting them. That's going to give you really a lot of insight on what the problems are, if it's data or if it's data quality in the organization, if there's other issues, and 9 times out of 10 it'll be people, process, or even both. And no technology buy is going to fix that. So.
No, those are good suggestions, and it's a good note to end on. Thanks for your perspective. Thanks you guys for listening. We'll be around if you guys want to talk more about it. Happy to do that. Thanks, John.